Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
I wanted to do two things this afternoon, and I will be brief. Firstly, I wanted to provide an overview of Australia and India collaboration on space. And secondly, I wanted to touch briefly on some of our space education initiatives. And for what it's worth, we have some leading edge research and development in key parts of space research and astronomy. But I thought, given the hour, it might be fun this afternoon to focus on some of the smaller initiatives targeting sort of building awareness and interest in space with younger kids. Space is, of course, an inherently global business, and Australia's been contributing to international space missions for decades. The first two graphics on this slide are sort of two more recent examples of this. We've heard a lot about Chandrayaan-3 today. It's very exciting about the first anniversary of its landing on Friday. Australia has a network of ground stations, and given our location down under and our dark skies, it means those ground stations and communications networks were amongst the first to communicate with Chandrayaan during its mission. The left is, of course, also very relevant. The Australian government is very proud to support ISRO's forthcoming Gaganyaan human spaceflight missions. We'll use all of those networks I just talked about, but in addition to that, we're also helping ISRO build and operate a temporary tracking and telemetry station in a very, very remote part of far north Australia, which will ensure continued communications with Gaganyaan vehicles. So that's really exciting. But we, of course, want to do more than just leverage our location. We very much want to see how we can contribute Australian tech and expertise and products and services to future space missions, whether they're with our European partners or with India or with NASA. We also want to help Australian businesses develop, commercialise, market space-enabled technologies. And that's where that final graphic on the right-hand slide comes in. That's ISI, stands for the International Space Investment Initiative, India. And just in a few months ago, the Australian government announced the first ever recipients of ISI funding. We're funding 3 Australian Indian consortia of researchers and businesses to commercialise deep tech in space, including some of the projects funded will look at space debris mitigation and new and more efficient ways to collect and analyse satellite data with a focus on greenhouse gas emissions. The government support to sort of get Australian tech and researchers into these supply chains is also why the Australian government is party to the Artemis Accords and is funding, if I can do this, 2 Australian project teams to build a lunar rover that will collect soil samples from the moon on a future NASA mission. I greatly respect India's sort of naming of things. It's all so sort of evocative. There's Chandrayaan and there was Pragyan and there was Vikram. And it's a little bit cringe, to be honest, but by popular vote, whichever consortia wins in this building of this rover, the rover will be named Ruva. As I said, by popular vote with the Australian public. The idea of Australia putting something on the moon is really not all that far-fetched. As a world leader in mining in some of the harshest and most remote environments, Australian companies are actually world leaders in robotics, automation, and remote operation technologies. So the Australian government is looking at how do we leverage these existing capabilities and sort of advantages and support global missions overseas and in space. This initiative graphic is also a good segue to the second thing I'd like to talk about quickly, and that's education. As I said, we have some world-leading research and development. We have a lot of collaborations with Indian universities. I'm going to leave that for today, but I wanted to focus on, how do we inspire that next generation of kids in Australia to study STEM-related skills and pursue STEM-related fields? And that's been really difficult. And access to a skilled workforce The workforce of the future we need is probably one of our greatest strategic challenges. We heard this morning from Chairman Somnath and others, India can point to, there's a generation of kids now that have seen the moon, Chandrayaan landing on the moon. That's been done wonders for space interest. We can't do that, but things like Ruva will show and be inspiring to that generation of Aussie kids. We've got a range of exchange programs, including one focused on Indigenous undergraduate students. We now have an Australian Space Discovery Centre in Adelaide, which he's just left for the afternoon, but Dr. Kumar from InSpace visited with the first Indian space industry delegation to Adelaide a couple of weeks ago. That Space Discovery Centre runs a range of tabletop sort of exercises for primary school students to get them interested. There's also a huge amount of work going on to sort of describe the sort of space careers that can be for anyone. Not everyone is going to be an astronaut, but what are the things you can study and do if you're interested in satellites or communications or space medicine? It's not on this screen. I don't have a slide, but I should say the other really important sort of initiative that supports that sort of inspiring of kids is we have a space engineer and a director at the Australian Space Agency, Catherine Bennell-Pegg, who recently completed her astronaut training at the European Space Agency. So if she gets onto a future space mission, she'll be the first astronaut from Australia to fly under an Australian flag, which is hugely exciting. And since her return to Australia, she's been doing the rounds, talking to schools, talking to universities, inspiring the next generation of Australians, particularly women, to pursue these interests. I wanted to finish on two things. The first one, and I think this picks up on things that were said in the earlier sessions today, is the Australian government's also spending a lot of time trying to articulate to the public just the diversity of space-enabled technologies and how they impact our daily lives. There's a couple of examples on there. Chairman Somnath also used an example this morning of how satellite data is supporting disaster response in India. At the moment, I don't know if you're aware, we have a sort of a raging bushfire season almost every year in Australia during our summers. We have a program called AquaWatch, which essentially has satellite data over the 300,000 water bodies in Australia. And that means come bushfire season, firefighters have at their fingertips information about where the best and nearest source of water is. It's saving lives. This is the last example I wanted to show. This is just a couple of screenshots from the website of the Australian Space Agency, who, as I said, are doing a huge amount of work to build interest in space. Now, you can take a quiz there, and it's about 10 questions, and you fill in some responses. What are you interested in? What would you do in this situation? Under the assumed example that you would like to become a space agent. My result is the screen on the right. Apparently my interests and the way I approach problems indicate I could become some sort of space techie. I'm, of course, I think the only person on this panel who doesn't have a PhD or a science background. I'm a trained lawyer, actually, but I'm starting to wonder now if I missed my calling. I would encourage all of you to go onto the website and have a go. It's a bit of fun. Thank you.